Today I'm talking about tips and tools for geospatial storytelling, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Um, so maps can provide a really powerful way to visualize broad systemic phenomena and their impact on health. One of the most well-known examples of this might be John Snow's cholera map. If you're not familiar, there was an outbreak of cholera in London in the 1850s. At the time, the disease was believed to be spread through bad air, but John Snow suspected it was transmitted through water instead. He made a map of the deaths from cholera and found a pattern circling a specific well, the Broad Street Pump. It's a textbook example of how mapping can be used to visualize environmental factors that are impacting health. There are, of course, many modern examples of maps being used to communicate about public health. Some of them are interactive tools to help people understand potential health risks. For example, maps with information about air quality or maps showing the material that's being used for drinking water service lines. So these applications can give you a broad overview of the situation while also allowing you to zoom in and explore areas and addresses that are of particular interest to you. So we can click around, we can interact, we can get information. With digital platforms, maps can also be leveraged alongside other material, leveraged alongside video, images, audio, and text to tell really compelling stories. And so, especially for people who are doing qualitative research or mixed method approaches, this can be a really interactive and engaging way to bring spatial thinking into a broader story. So maps can be used to explore sort of time periods before and after. They can be used to jump between different scales of analysis. So if you're looking at something at kind of a regional or even a global perspective, you can be doing that while also kind of having an opportunity to highlight specific, more grounded studies with video or um, images and kind of other other case studies that are embedded inside the broader story. It's also allows an opportunity to collect stories or place-based feedback from people who are interacting with your project through geospatially enabled surveys. And yeah, it's also pretty fun because you can have surveys that you can look at and kind of monitor the responses, or you can have ones that automatically populate and show up pretty much as soon as someone adds something. So that's fun. For today's webinar, we're going to be exploring geospatial storytelling. The examples that we'll look at today were built using the platform ArcGIS Online, most of them specifically with a product called ArcGIS Story Maps. I'm going to talk a lot more about it later, but just so you know, affiliates of the University of Minnesota, students, faculty, and staff all have free access to use this software. A lot of state agencies and counties also use this product, at least in the United States. And there are discounted licenses for nonprofits as well. So as we look through some of the examples, just have in the back of your head that you might have access to be using this tool. All right, so as a roadmap, we're going to start out by looking at some tips for using maps effectively within digital storytelling. So chatting about some of the different mechanisms that you might consider and how how you can make these interactive maps work effectively for your stories. We'll then look at some tips for making well-designed maps more generally. So things for interactive projects, but also if you have a static map or have a map in a presentation, just kind of a few hot tips about what to think about when you're using maps. We'll talk about a few challenges for representing geospatial health data specifically, and then we'll finish looking at tools and resources. Just kind of a heads up, some of the stuff I have is pretty scripted, but I am happy to stop at any point to take questions or go off on tangents. So feel free to put things in the chat or raise your hand, and if I see them in time, I can stop and go in that direction. I think we probably will have plenty of time once I finished kind of my prepared stuff. And so that's intentional. I'm happy to kind of take the conversation in whatever direction you're interested in. I can do more detailed demonstrations of tools, or we can have a discussion. All right, so the first topic we're going to look at is we're going to look at some examples to kind of think about effectively using digital maps. And so there are lots of different types of ways to use maps. Some of the ones that I think we see more commonly are quantitative representations of data. So you've got your like chloropleth maps, you've got graduated symbols, those kinds of things. There are lots of ways you can also leverage maps around qualitative data. Sort of using it as a way to just reference or give someone context, using it as a way to organize materials. And so we'll kind of look at a few of those and a few different interactive ways to kind of bring people into your story. So the things we'll focus on in this section are kind of jumping between different scales of analysis, looking at different interactivity options, and then thinking about using digital maps as a way to break up uh, more complex maps and kind of uh, explain what you're doing if you are using quantitative maps and do have a kind of a more intense analysis, but trying to break that into a way that the public can understand and digest your information. All right, so our first example is a story map about factory farms in Illinois. And I love this map in that it does a really good job of jumping between scales. So at the start of it, it presents the context of this map is Illinois, but it allows you to kind of focus in on one specific farm and one specific um, sort of activist activity around factory farms. So it grounds the story in a specific struggle using videos, um, a lot of really nice pictures and graphs, kind of explaining this one woman and her neighbors' effort to prevent a factory hog farm from being located in their community. But what also is nice is once it kind of grounds you in that specific study, it also connects that to the broader picture. So we have, this is the farm that was going to be cited before they took action and the area that was the proposed effects of that farm. But then it zooms out to show you how many similar situations, how many permits there are in the entire state of Illinois. So you kind of can have a sense of the stakes of this kind of action in the community. I also love it because it, as you scroll, it also kind of, if you're reading through, it explains the limitations of what it's showing as well. So it's both giving a map, but also giving you context of that map. So not all of the factory farms require a permit. So it also is showing another supplementary data layer showing wells that are that often are associated with water, giving water to livestock. And so giving a sense of potentially how many farms there might be in the state of Illinois. So I think it does, I think this specific story map and digital mapping in general give a real opportunity to kind of do that kind of that storytelling at a personal embodied level, but also allowing to really quickly connect that to other scales. So one other example that we'll look at on this topic. So this is an example of women sharing stories about their reproductive health in Africa. And so this is an example, we again have some videos of just ways to, so this map isn't really, the map itself isn't giving you a ton of information other than grounding you in the geography of Africa if you're not familiar, but it's kind of an organizational technique to provide access to these stories and videos. So as we scroll through, we can either click on the different videos or just go systematically through each one and kind of have that grounded context um, in in the middle of this kind of broader story. And if we keep going all the way down, it also links out to kind of a more complicated mapping tool. So um, we can have access to those quantitative stories as well, and kind of click through a few different um, pieces of information around what access is happening kind of at a broader level within this region. I'm going to come back to this later because at a later point, I have some slides just about making maps and some tips around that. Um, in this particular example, there's some data layers that are in the map but not showing, but they're showing up in this legend. So one thing to be aware of when you're making these kinds of maps is always try to have the end user in mind and make sure that kind of the display of a map like this really simplifies things to be what the audience should be looking at. All right, so the next kind of broad category of thing that can be done really well in a digital mapping platform is there's lots of opportunities for interactivity that can really help your reader and audience stay engaged. Sometimes with websites and digital projects, it's just ends up being a lot of scrolling. If you have a lot of content you want to give to people, and so it can kind of be a little bit more difficult to keep people engaged in your work. So this is a map about coronavirus and how it began and how it spread. But one thing that I kind of like about it, as it's showing how the virus emerged, there's opportunities to interact with the map. So these are called Sorry. They just changed the names. They used to be map actions. I believe they're now called media actions. So if you click on one of these, it sort of changes what's displayed on the map, either by changing the zoom level, or it might also change like what layers are being shown. So we're able to kind of, again, jump between these different scales and interact with the map. As we keep going, we're kind of spreading out. We started centered on the market, and now we're kind of looking at how it spread and where the disease is going to. There's different kinds of maps, so we saw graduated symbols there. We're seeing kind of a network map here. And again, we have the opportunity to interact with this map and jump between just kind of the domestic flights that were happening and to see how it quickly was spreading beyond that with these international flights. So again, just kind of really, really interesting ways to interact and to keep people engaged with your content. Just one more example of kind of how those media actions can work. This is just a map of kind of showing the spread of cities and how they, what their footprint has been, their urban extent over time. So these media actions can be really useful if you have like more than two variables you're trying to show. And yeah, it's great for showing kind of change over time between multiple time periods. All right, and then the final mechanism I want to show you at the right now is the ability of this kind of digital project to take something that's pretty complicated and break it into pieces so that rather than just kind of throwing someone into the conclusion or into the complicated final map, you're kind of walking them through each stage to understand it better. So this is a story map that's looking at um, trying to find locations where you might put a new healthcare center in Boston. It's called like a site selection analysis. So as we scroll through, it sort of starts by presenting maps of each of the categories on which they're trying to make this site selection. So It shows like where the transit lines are. It shows where existing health centers are. And then it gives each of these criteria that they're going to use in the final analysis. And so one reason I really like this is, if you were presenting this to a public and trying to explain why you chose one location, I feel like this method allows people to react to these criteria and sort of explain, see on the map how they came to a certain conclusion, but also be able to like respond more in a way that's more informed by kind of, arguing, well, you said that the census tract that you're going to locate this new health center has to be above 40% medical illness, but looking at your map, there's, what if there was a place that was in this next category down is actually very close? Like why did you have that threshold? And so, it kind of lets people pick apart the methods and pick apart what you're working on to have a more engaged discussion. So um, this map kind of presents all those criteria, and then as you scroll through, it shows how, using those criteria starts limiting where you might put um, this healthcare center. Only 2 of these census tracts fit all of the criteria. And as we scroll down, we then introduce if it's going to be close to a train station. We have this nice, fun, interactive and engaging slider bar. And we have another one to show uh, oh, sorry, that first one was being close to another healthcare center. This final one is it also is supposed to be close to a train station. And then, with that information, we've now kind of worked our way down to these 2 proposals for where you might cite the new center. So I really like it for its kind of ability to provide context and provide additional information alongside a series of maps. All right, one final example. So this is another example of kind of providing context and introducing someone to the analysis that you've done. This one's looking at access to childcare for families in Minnesota. So this map, it does kind of at the start throw you into the middle of it. Oh, it's not loading for me. Oh, here we go. Okay. So, at first glance, this is somewhat complex. I don't necessarily know what's happening here. But as you scroll through, it teaches you what you should be looking at and kind of how to interpret and understand it. So it explains, what it means to have blue or red dots, um, and kind of what that means, and then zooms into a few locations to kind of explain explains in the context of specific locations, how you might interpret it or what it means. Going to Northfield, going to Lonsdale. And so it's sort of steps you through so that by the time you get to a more interactive map where you're allowed to click around and explore on your own, you have that understanding of how the map works and how you might engage with it. So one thing I do want to note, hopefully these examples are exciting and kind of interesting to you. I love this platform. It is great in many ways, but with any digital project, with any project like this, they are necessarily ephemeral. So if we keep going, this is an older project that I'm linking to, and I did this on purpose because the actual map that you might engage with is fundamentally broken. And so uh, these types of projects require a lot of maintenance if you wish for them to continue to be relevant to people. So it is just something to keep in mind when you're setting out and having an idea that you might want to create one of these. This particular example was built in an older version of the platform that I'm going to be talking about later. And they are actually retiring it completely, and stories that were built in this platform will be going away in about 9 months. So any platform that you choose to build these kinds of projects on do have kind of a limited lifespan potentially. So it's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about how much time you want to invest in one of these projects, even though they are very cool. All right. I'm gonna stop for 1 second and take a look at the chat. Just make sure. Oh, there's a question whether you have access to the stories or access to these story maps. So actually, I want to say this entire presentation is actually inside of a story map of a kind. This is inside of a collection. So I can go ahead and put that into the chat right now so you can take a look. So basically a collection is each tile is a story map or it also can point out to, for example, slides. So I have a mix of Google Slides, I have a mix of tools, and then there's also some story maps. So um, let me know if anything doesn't work in a public setting. All right, are there any questions about that first section? All right, we will have a lot more time at the end to discuss things in more detail as well. So I'm going to move into the next section. And so this, I'm kind of calling it like Cartography 101. And so um, uh, this this is kind of aimed at more generally if you're putting maps into a project, into a either an interactive project or other things that you're doing. What are some just general tips of things that you should be looking for and to make your maps really productive and effective? So first tip is that it isn't what you put on the map, it's what you leave off. So in the era of digital maps, there's just a lot of data out there that can all be pulled into a project. And so it can be very tempting to include just every demographic, social variable that has any kind of correlation with your topic, because there are lots of correlations potentially, but less is definitely more. So the more complex your map, the more difficult it will be for your audience to make sense of it. So often kind of either having a series of maps or picking a focus and really sticking to that is going to be more effective than trying to like throw all of the connections into a single place. Which brings us to the second tip, which is to know your audience and the purpose of the map. So are you presenting a map to a knowledgeable audience who'd be interested in the nuances of the spatial pattern? Is it a map that is going to be interactive, that people can click on it and get more information? And therefore, if it has some complexity, it's kind of intended for them to spend some time and interact with it. Or is it a map that's kind of for a more general audience and you're really trying to just focus people on like a few specific areas? So let's say in this example, you really just want people to focus on the areas that where there's a really high number of people who don't have access to health insurance. And so, just targeting like if it's above 50% or above 25% and kind of really focusing people's um, attention there and choosing to have less classes to kind of focus the argument on the place where they're going to need to have that that focus. So connected to this is also the idea that these two maps are based on the same data set, and they obviously look very different and give you a different feel for the data. And that is a complexity that it is tricky to deal with. And so the third tip is just symbolizing carefully and sensibly. So when you're making maps, um, based on the way that you classify your data, it will really impact how people perceive your information. And uh, these are just like the other slide. All of these are showing the same data set, just with the data grouped into different classes, grouped differently into those different classes. And there is no objective, one fair, right way to display a data set. So really, when you're thinking about how you want to show it, you just really need to think about how can you represent it as truthfully as you can, or not truthfully, but like, don't be intentionally disingenuous about how you cut the data into slices, but know that like those choices are going to impact people. Likewise, in addition to like how you group them into categories, also just the number of classes you put will give a really different look and feel for your project. So just be really thoughtful and careful about how you're representing your data to others. Also tied to kind of what's possible when you're representing maps, there are limits to our perceptions of colors. So um, we can only distinguish with our eyes so many different hues before it starts to become a jumble. And this is particularly true when you start putting things on a map, either with layers on top of each other or with colors kind of interspersed and next to each other. So real quick, take a look at this slide and to yourself, which of these squares in the center has a darker hue, do you think? It's, to me, I feel like this one looks like it's a little darker, but I also know the answer, which is that they are the same. Um, but the tricky thing with color is that you you kind of the color is not just one thing. Your perception of it is controlled by the context in which it is situated. So even if you have a color ramp that when you see it off to the side of the map, you're like, oh yeah, it's kind of clear which color is which. When you start mixing them together in a jumble on a map, it can be really hard to distinguish between individual colors. And to complicate that even further, there's a substantial portion of the population that has some form of color blindness. So um, each of these circles has a number written in it. If, like me, you don't have color blindness, you'll probably be able to see it across all of them. But if you have a form of red-green color blindness, it might be really hard. So I have a colorblind tool that tells me that roughly this might be an approximation of what it would look like to some people. So it's really important to kind of have that in mind when you're choosing colors for your map and being aware that other people are going to perceive the colors that are on your map differently than you are. Because of that, one of the tips is to have no more than 5 to 7 data classes on of like a single variable on your map. I will say for qualitative data, that can be really tricky to do. Sometimes it's really hard to generalize the information that you're collecting into just a really small number of categories, and to do so feels like you're not representing the data very well. Um, and it's really tricky trying to balance having a map that is simple enough that people can distinguish between the different classes and read it quickly and easily, that you're not limiting interpretation of that map if someone comes to it who has a form of color blindness or isn't perceiving it the same way, but also to represent the data well. So that's a general recommendation, but with an acknowledgement that it can be really hard. Another thing is that contrast is really key. So having a distinction between symbols and background color is really important. For example, if you have points on a map, if you're going to have those points over aerial imagery, having a green dot is going to be really hard to see. So in general, the software like Story Maps and the other software will help you to make good design choices, both in terms of picking symbols and classification, but just be aware and thinking about it when you're reviewing your maps. So one tool that I really enjoy and I recommend using if you're thinking about making maps. This is a tool called Color Brewer that was designed by Cynthia Brewer. She's a fantastic cartographer and has created these really attractive color schemes. What I love about this tool as well is that you can select things to limit it to show only the only things that would be colorblind safe or that would be able to be used with like photocopiers, be able to print it and have it still represent well. You can also change the number of classes. Um, I'll say that like there's quite a lot of options when you're looking at like sequential styles of color ramps. So those are ones that have a difference in value over the range of a hue. So just light to dark. When you go over to qualitative, you'll see it's really hard to have colorblind safe options. So she doesn't have any that have 7. In fact, I think you have to go down. Yeah, she only has a color ramp that has 4 different colors that she thinks is truly colorblind safe. So color blindness is hard to account for. But I will say I love this tool. I have used these colors. You can kind of click on a style and then grab the code for it. I've used it to design posters. I've used it to figure out colors to paint walls in my house. I really do recommend this tool. All right, and then my final tip is just to present contextual information with the end user, the end reader in mind. So the default legend that often comes out of these tools tends to be a little bit chaotic. You might have a lot of numbers after the decimal point. It might include kind of a variable name that isn't particularly, um, that has either an abbreviation or it's limited in some ways and isn't an English word. So just thinking about that and trying to represent it in a way that's going to really be easy to understand by the person who's reading your map. And likewise, if you have any pop-ups, a lot of time the default within ArcGIS products and other geospatial tools is to, there often data comes with a lot of extra variables, like variables that are about identifiers or pieces of information about like where an object is in the world. And generally, those aren't very useful to your end user. So just really thinking about what's going to display and how people are going to interact with that map is important. All right, so I'm going to move on now to our third topic, which is thinking about some of the limitations of uh, representing health data specifically on maps. Um,
Hey,
so,
Melinda,
yeah,
before we
yeah.
jump in there, there's a good question in the
Oh,
chat here from a
thank you,
person,
thank you.
from Ruth. How would you combat the transient nature of these
Oh,
digital platforms? What are some ways to preserve and crystallize the map you created so it is still accessible over time?
sure, sure, sure. Thank you. So yes, that is an excellent question. And as a librarian, I think about it a lot, to be honest. So I'll say there's one option is that, and we can, oh no, well, it's fine. Uh, one option is there is an opportunity for you to like print a story map. Oh, I think because I don't own this one, I don't have the option. But um, if you, there is a way to kind of convert a story map into a PDF. It's not a great representation in terms of like a lot of the interactivity is removed. Also, the formatting of it is often a little bit wonky. But in terms of having like some representation of it for your future knowledge in case it starts breaking or something happens to the platform, a lot of the work that goes into this is gathering materials, gathering information, gathering kind of how it was organized. So you would at least have that and have the opportunity to rebuild a project if you needed to. There's also sometimes people will like archive all of the pieces of it if they can't archive, the entire thing. So um, some people will take, like, if there is any data sets being used in a map, take all of the, download all of those data sets, put them in a folder with a set of images, a set of text, just again so that, if in the worst case scenario, you could rebuild the product. So in terms of like trying to really keep the interactive version of it present, there isn't a simple answer. So in our specific example, in this example, this could be rebuilt, and actually I believe it has been, at least to some extent, rebuilt in like the newer version of the builder. So, keeping track of the project and keeping an eye on what Esri and or whatever product you're using to build a digital project in, making sure you're aware of any changes that they're making to the technology, and just, being prepared that you might have to do a bunch of work again in the future to try to upgrade it to the newest version. Um,
Are
I
there
really
any non-Esri platforms you would recommend? Like I suggested Leaflet as a possibility, but
Yeah, yeah. So there are, I'll say in terms of kind of the easiness of adding different types of content and media. I don't know of any like direct equivalent. Definitely, there are products that allow you to make kind of open source maps like Leaflet. And so if you have the technical skills to just like build your own website, you can definitely put in pieces of you can take maps that were made in Leaflet or other places and kind of code uh, your own story map. Like, definitely it doesn't have to be in this platform. Um, I will say, so like the example here, the map that is no longer functioning, this product used to be like a free open source version or a free open source map platform that I used to recommend to people as an alternative to ArcGIS. So do be aware that if you find um, like newer products or open source products, that those also are changing over time. Like, it's unfortunately the nature of the internet that you know the code base is constantly changing, and therefore it kind of there's nothing we've found so far that completely will protect a digital project. Um, One other thing you can try to do is like you can take a video of yourself interacting with a story map. I've seen people do that as well. Um, Again, doesn't capture the interactivity piece of it.
yeah, I've also seen people make GIFs of their interactive maps and then post the GIF to the website as a more stable format, kind of like a video method. So yeah, that's another good idea. One other topic question came up here from Whitney. Are there any recommendations for working around 508 compliance and design or color choices?
Yeah, so I'll say that the like story map product takes kind of accessibility pretty seriously. So if you are using the default kind of themes and the default uh, symbols that you put into maps that are made directly in the product, um, it's pretty good in terms of color contrast and that kind of thing. The tricky thing comes if you start making your own like custom maps, then you have to be aware of, or if you make a custom theme, being aware that you should also be paying attention to the rules around that. All right, and then oh, I'm also seeing, yeah, for color blindness, could one use different textures, directions, hashing dots? Yes, that is also a great idea. I think um, yeah, if you have like a lot of different categories that you need to show, Having some different textures can definitely be a way to increase the number of categories that are going to be available that different people would be able to see. Um,
No further
that
questions, it looks like.
that's great. Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Those are amazing questions. Okay, so let's go back. I am gonna have to jump ahead. Oh no, wait, I forgot. Okay. Um, all right, so next section we're gonna talk through is just thinking about a few of the limitations that come with working with health data specifically. And so the first limitation is location is very identifiable as a piece of information. So when you think about privacy and ethics around health data, you need to be really careful about how you display content about individuals on a map. If you have a video interview with someone and then you're putting on a point on a map to represent them, where are you putting that point? For some of the maps we looked at, we were looking at attitude across like an entire country. So with something like that, you know, you could put your point 100 miles away from where they actually lived or where you were interacting with them, and it wouldn't really make too much of a difference at this scale. But we also, you know, looked at an example that was like zoomed in on a particular farm. And so, you know, then you'd have to really be thinking about uh, where you actually put this view and kind of think about being really upfront when you're talking with case study participants about how you might represent their lives on the map and make sure that you're getting proper consent around how you represent them in the project. The second point, and this one is a little harder to wrap your head around, is that at the heart of it, spatial scales at which health impacts emerge don't always match the scale at which data is collected or available. So that could be because of the logistics, the impact, the thing you're looking at is at a very small scale, like the scale of a block or a household, and the effort needed to collect information over a large area and keep that data up to date would just be prohibitive. And so it doesn't exist as a layer. It also could be because there's privacy concerns around sensitive health information. Again, location's very identifiable, but then when you start aggregating data, it can change patterns or impact the effectiveness of your map. So let's make this a little more grounded. So there's a lot of articles out there that are based around the idea that where you live has a profound impact on your health. And the shorthand of that often is that your zip code is a predictor of your health. Zip codes are indeed pretty frequently used as a unit of analysis in health studies. If you've got a list of addresses, it's pretty easy to drop the specifics and just aggregate it to the zip code. If you're trying to limit privacy issues, you might choose to just from the start only collect the zip code. It's something that a lot of people know and might feel comfortable sharing. But zip codes are boundaries designed to route and deliver mail. They don't necessarily align with areas of similar socio-demographic status or environmental conditions. Sometimes they have really odd shapes or they cut across neighborhoods. And so just in general, they can contain a lot of heterogeneity. So take zip code 55406 as an example. The area has $1 million houses along the river, but they also have low income Section 8 housing within the boundary as well. So if we look at an average household income for the area, we'll find it's above average for the region, about 90,000. But if we look at data that's at a finer scale, a finer resolution, we can start seeing the real heterogeneity within this boundary. So in fact, there's actually two adjacent block groups where the difference in average income exceeds 100,000. So the average aggregated experience of this zip code doesn't really represent well the experiences of all the people who live there. And so the problem with this, if we go back to our starting map, we go back to Jon Snow's cholera map. Let's imagine that instead of mapping individual households where someone had died, the data had instead been aggregated to larger areas. Depending on how that area was split up, you might still capture the center and the source of the illness, but you also might get a more obscure pattern or even put the focus on the wrong area entirely. So, being clear about what spatial scale you think an issue is emerging at and kind of keeping in your head that there might be patterns at different scales than what you're able to easily see is important. So, a final bonus tip is just because you can make a map doesn't mean that you always should. Sometimes you don't have data at the right scale to capture or communicate about an issue. And so you can still tell some pretty compelling place-based and geospatial stories, even without maps or even with maps that aren't as deeply quantitative um, as you might have. So with actually, I'm going to stop again for any questions about that last section because I know that I yeah, I know. I love maps too, Joe. I think, sometimes even I struggle to keep that spatial problem in my head. If the finest level of detail you have is a census tract on a certain issue or, a county, it's just really easy to fall into the risk of just sort of thinking that everything within that area matches the number that you're seeing on the map. So even in some of my examples where I was like focusing on above 50%, it's like what was happening right across the boundary? Like if we drew these lines in a slightly different way, would we get a different map? And the answer is that we would. So kind of tricky. All right. So since it doesn't seem like there's burning questions at this exact moment, I'm going to move into my final section just to talk a little bit more about the tool and some resources, and then we'll kind of break and we can go in a bunch of different directions. So again, the product that I've been using to show is called ArcGIS Story Maps. It's a product created by a company called Esri. So this is again available to anyone who is a affiliate of the University of Minnesota, student, staff, and faculty for free, as well as it's available kind of broadly in the U.S. With organizations like at the state and county level. It is actually just one product within a broader suite of tools. So ArcGIS Online is kind of the parent digital product. So in addition to telling stories with story maps, there's also ways to make more complicated web maps, find and share geospatial data, collect data through geospatially enabled surveys, and make dashboards or other web maps. So I was just going to show really quickly how easy it is to, oh gosh, that's strange. I was going to show what it's like to log in. And this might, okay, we're going to sign out. So if you're part of the University of Minnesota, to start an account in ArcGIS Story Maps, all you have to do is come to storymaps.arcgis.com. I'll throw that in the chat. Go to this link, click on sign in. In order to access the U of M's account, we're going to put in UMN. If you're connected to another organization that has an ArcGIS license, this code would be a little different. And then we'll click on continue. We have the opportunity to just sign in with our U of M Internet ID. And we'll sign in kind of the same way that we would sign in to email or other products at the university. You might have to Duo. I'm signed in somewhere else, so it didn't make me do that. That's excellent. And then here we are kind of in the product and the platform. Getting started on a story is super easy. You just click up in the corner on create story, start from scratch, and now we're in it. So Basically, when you're thinking about things you want to add to your story map, all you have to do is click on a plus sign, and it gives you all these different kind of component content blocks that you can add. You can add, lots of different types of images, audio, swipe maps, regular maps, and also some of the immersive sections where there's some content and then some context kind of scrolling along the side. So um, for the moment, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to kind of finish the slides, but if there's interest, I can come back in here and just start demoing a few different types of content that you can add. In addition to stories, I was showing you that I also do have, there's the option to have a collection of stories. So in my example, I have a mix of stories and slides and different applications. I think more often it is something that would be used to have just kind of a set of stories all on the same topic. So, for example, this one is the libraries did kind of during the pandemic era. We used to do pop-up exhibits in person at events at Northrop, but we couldn't do that during the pandemic. And so there's kind of these digital sets of resources and information. So each one is a different presentation. But if you have, something that you're trying to prepare information about that is going to get really extensive, if you try to throw it all in a single digital project, you can split it up in this way and bring it all together in the form of a collection. One other thing I'd like to point out right now, there are some quick links when you sign into this tool. The tutorials that Esri has put together are actually really good, I think. You can skip the first one because that's if you were building in the older version of the platform, but this getting started with ArcGIS Story Map, it is about story maps inside of a story map. It's really good. And then there's other walkthroughs if there's like a specific content block that you're interested in trying to learn more about and use. Yeah, their documentation is pretty on point. If you are, oh gosh, now we are going to have to go through all the other slides. If you would rather kind of have a more in-person experience learning about story maps beyond what we're talking about today, U-spatial is a center on campus that does support for spatial research. They have some trainings. They have one that's about story maps specifically that's about 2 hours, I think, and then another one that's about kind of ArcGIS Online maps more generally that I think is 3 hours long. They also do have a help desk. So if you are connected to the university and you're starting to poke around and hit any kind of problems, you can write to them, and they have some really talented graduate students and staff who can get back to you and answer some questions. I also did throw a few resources into the last slide of this presentation. Yeah, just a place to kind of get started while if this is a technology that's of interest to you. Okay, so with that, I will stop and take more questions if you have it. Okay. All right, so question. All right, can alumni get access for free too? The answer is no. We do, if you create something while you are at the university, if you make it public, we do continue to host things past someone's graduation or when they leave for at least a short period of time. So like if you do something as part of a project for a class and you want to use it in a portfolio for a few years while you're looking for work, um, we will kind of keep hosting the projects for a little while. But honestly, with the changes to email for life and also some changes that we're expecting to come down the line from Esri in terms of like how we can store things. Right now, they're talking about changing our level of access, and the amount of storage we currently take up is like 4 times what they are saying educational licenses will cover. So at some point, we are going to have to probably be removing more of the content that alumni have created. There is a free option, a free account with Esri. It doesn't have the ability to, let me go over to Esri. Let's see if I can find it. Public account. Oh, yeah. So you can create a public account. Um, they do have some limitations. Mainly, you can't host data. So that's, if you're trying to create a more complex map, that's going to get in the way. But there is a lot of data out there that other people are hosting that you could pull into a project. Another limitation of public accounts, if you're trying to like do something in a group, there's not really very much functionality to kind of work with others from a public account. There are also paid, like personal but paid accounts that I think are $100 a year, which isn't great, but it actually is pretty cheap for this suite of tools in terms of how much they charge like companies. And those you can host data, but there still are limitations around being in groups. Um, Okay, question. How much do you plan before creating a story map in ArcGIS? That's an excellent question. I do recommend kind of doing some level of storyboarding before you get started. I personally think it's very easy to just be like, I can add this and this and this, and just kind of pretty soon it grows into a really long and complex story map without me intending it to. So I do think being thoughtful about like what maps are really going to push forward your story, what resources do you want to include? It's really useful when you're making a digital project to think about shortening your paragraphs so that instead of kind of big blocks of text, you have much more streamlined and just smaller chunks tend to be more digestible for people to see and to understand. And so being really like not like simplifying things, just being concise and thinking about like what's the most important text and information to include is definitely, something that academics kind of sometimes have to learn and practice. So I do think planning in advance can really help out with that. Also, I'll say if you're at the start of the project thinking about what might happen at the end of the project, the fact that, the project is at some level ephemeral, I think kind of gathering resources in advance and keeping those can help you down the road if you ever want to kind of like package it all together and archive it. So sometimes I'll like download every image that I want to include in the project and like chuck it into a folder. Maybe have either a Google Doc or Word doc or a free equivalent and kind of do some of my sketching of things in there before I get into story maps. But I also will say story maps, it's really easy to like add and delete things. So, you know, um, if we get started again, like you can add a bunch of content blocks and move them around as well. So it is a little bit up to your own just workflow and what makes sense to you. But I do think it's I do think it's a good idea to kind of plan it out before it takes control of your life. Are there other questions? These are all great questions, by the way. Thank you very much. All right. If there's interest, I can kind of just start building a story map and just for those who haven't worked in the platform before, just kind of poke around and add a few items. Would that be of interest and helpful? Yes, please. Okay. we've got at least one person who would enjoy that. So I have an example, and as we were just talking about in terms of having information that you've collected in advance, I have prior to this session downloaded some images and also just put some like starter text into a notepad. So if I'm like sort of pulling things over or copying things and it's quickly appearing, it's just stuff that I have written out in advance about this example. Okay, so when you're first starting a story map, the first thing to do is to kind of put in some kind of image or something that's really going to like pull people into the story and set the tone. So we'll go ahead and browse, okay, and just add one of these images. Whenever you add an image into story maps, you'll have some options that you can get to by clicking on this gear wheel. You can sort of change the focus of the image, and there's also a place to put both attribution and also alternative text. So both of those things are sort of important to add. So the alternative text is information that you can put so that if somebody is accessing your project with a screen reader or other assistive technology, if they aren't able to see the image, the alternative text tells them sort of what they would have been seeing within the image. And so for this cover image, there also are some extra things that we can do. Up at the top, there is a design tab, and that will change the overall look and feel of this story map. So you can change the cover image and how it relates to the title. And then, oh, I don't know. Sure, that one. And then there's also options to change the theme. So again, as long as you go with one of these 6, it already has kind of thought through the like you can expect that the contrast will meet a lot of the compliance standards. If you decide you want to go your own way and make your own theme to match branding or something, just be aware that you should be, careful about some of those color limitations. Another thing that I recommend when you're in the design is if you turn on navigation, that will give you like the little bar that allows you to jump between different sections of the story map. So that's very useful to have. All right, let's go back. So this example is going to be about the Copper Coke Foundry, which is a Superfund site that is close to a place that I once lived. I think I spelled it right. Well, it's fine. Okay, so as we scroll down, kind of the simplest thing to add is text. So you can just basically start typing. There's not a huge range of options for formatting, but there are some. Anything that you put as a heading 1 is going to show up in this bar, this navigation bar. So that's maybe the one important thing to know about the formatting. There are also ways to, you can put things in quotes. That's kind of fun. You can make lists and whatnot. So a few different options. Oops, I accidentally made that italic. Okay. Another fun thing to do, you can like put in a bunch of images all at once. Just put every image I have. Sweet. Very nice. You can add things like timelines in different ways. So lots of different options. I think I'll just focus on the maps because they're a little bit, I mean, this is a session about geospatial storytelling, so always got to love the maps, but also I think they are probably the most complicated of the things that you can add. So I mentioned that this is connected to this broader suite of tools. So if you have built maps in other sections of the platform, they will appear for you here and you can embed them in. But there's also the option to add what's called express maps, and those kind of live entirely within story maps. And so they can be, for example, a really quick way to just put in like a reference map that helps people understand where the project is in relationship to um, in relationship to them. I'm trying to remember if I have the address written down somewhere to quickly jump. I don't think I do. Well, that's fun. So we're just going to scroll to the location because I did not write it down. So this used to be kind of close to Hamlin University. I believe it's this area. We're just going to say that for now. That's fine. Okay, so we can situate ourselves on a location. If we had known the address, we could also put it here and it would zoom us to the location. Inside of Express Maps, there's lots of different options for quickly adding features to your map. You can put just points. And if we do that, we can add images and a little description that will show up in the pop-up. So we can add one of these images. And we'll just say Coopers and save that. And save. All right, so really quick way to just kind of add a pop-up, add some information. Oh gosh. One other thing, so you can change how much of the screen it takes up using, oh gosh, using this bar. Also, if you make any kind of mistake and you want to go back in and keep editing, you can just click on this pencil and you'll be back in the map. So let's say, for example, I don't like the default map that's showing up here behind my point. If I come over here to this gear wheel, that's kind of always going to be your options button. We have options to do things like turn on legends, change how it's navigating on the map. There's also the option to set a base map that is different than what the default is. So there's a bunch to choose from, and you can also, if you have a map, again, in that broader platform, you can go out and grab that and pull that in to be behind your image. So let's say maybe I want aerial imagery instead. I'll save that. All right, so scrolling down, um, I'm going to show the most complicated sections inside of story maps are these two immersive options. So the sidecar is kind of the one I see maybe people use the most frequently. There's a few different layouts for it. You can have a panel that's docked to the side. You can have one that's kind of floating. That one's fun. Let's do that one. So basically, within your sidecar, you have a main stage item, can be a map, can be something else. And then off to the side is this box that has the context and information about what's showing in this main stage. So let's add a map again. We can do an express map again, that's fine. I still don't know the address, so I'll get there the long way. Oh gosh, woo. Over here. Okay, so let's say, again, I didn't actually do enough research on this site to know everything about it, but I'm gonna just say that it used to be here. Probably incorrect. All right, so we can save that feature and then come over here and say the Foundry was built. Also, let's go ahead and add a heading just to show that it will show up in this bar up here. That's great. We're going to jump to this section really easily now. One cool thing about sidecars is that you can set yourself up to do what's called, or Esri calls it, map choreography. So basically, you're taking a map and then putting something on it and then slightly editing that map so that as you scroll through, it feels interactive. So we have right now this one slide down here. If we make a duplicate copy of that slide, we can then edit the slide to show a change in time. So let's say the site expanded. We're going to be careful not to change sort of the way that the map is aligned, and we'll save that. We'll come over here and change it to explain expanded. Again, I'm just making things up at this point. Don't use any of these numbers or these dates as anything serious. Okay, so we now have these two slides. And so I can preview and show you what that ends up looking like. All right, so here we go. We've got our point that we can look at. That's really nice. Okay, so we have our sidecar. As we start scrolling, it, it'll change pretty seamlessly in between these two sections. So that's kind of one way that you can just make something that feels really interactive and cool. So I really like that as one technique to kind of present information. The preview is also really nice because you can change what screen size the it's showing. So if I wanted to know like how the thing I'm building would look on a smaller screen on a phone, you can select that as an option. Okay, and then let's see. I guess I'll also show you really quickly what a map tour looks like, because there were some of those in the example. So we'll start from scratch. There's a few different layout options for this as well. The ones up top that are called guided tours, these kind of will take you in a specific order. So if you're like setting up a walking tour or you are showing change over time, like this happened and then this happened and then this happened, these guided tours can be really great. They can focus either on like an image of something, or they can focus on the location on the map. There's also a layout that's a little bit more loose. So there's lists or kind of galleries, and people can pick at random. So if you have, you know, case studies or sites and you want people to have the opportunity to just explore them in general, and there isn't really an order to them, the grid style can be useful. So it doesn't really matter for right now which one we choose. Okay, so we're again in kind of this slightly more complex layout structure. I'm going to say the thing I find confusing about this map is not something that you really interact with when you're adding points. When you edit it, it's just controlling like what scale at which people are going to be interacting with the points at. So the default is generally like the entire world, but you can set it so that when it's going point to point, it is at a smaller scale. So let's say I'm going to do, I guess, states. And it doesn't matter where it's showing up on the map right now. This is just controlling like the zoom level and kind of, what the base map is and kind of how the map functions, not what it actually is focused on. Okay, so we can save that. And then over here, we can go ahead and add a location. Oh gosh. All right, well, I really wish I knew this address. It would have saved us some time. That's fine. I think it's over. Nope. Yeah, that's close enough. We can again set kind of the whether we want to zoom every single time and have that be what it chooses, or we can have the overall tour setting that we just set. So we'll go with that. Click on save. And then we could add here an image or a video. So go ahead, add something quick. Add. Okay. And then if we wanted another one, we can come down here. There's an opportunity to just add a new slide. This is also an option in Sidecar if you're not trying to do like a map choreography kind of thing. So we'll just put another random point in here. Let's do this one this time. And we can go ahead, call this site 2. We'll add a location. Uh, okay. I think I set I wasn't thinking about what I was going to be showing, so let me change my thing to be a little closer. County. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. All right, and we can go ahead and preview that, see what that's going to look like. Ooh. Okay, zoom in. All right, so we've got our first point and our second one. So one thing I recommend with map tours is I at least find if you zoom like too far in one go, it like makes you kind of dizzy. So I would recommend like this is about as much movement as I would want. Like try to think about positioning it so it, adjusts focus, but it doesn't make people sick. All right. Let's see. I guess I'll show just a couple more things. So if we wanted to add like a more complex map, we can do that. Yeah, sure. Let's just add this test map. Oh, right. This is actually about the topic because I was trying to prep an example. So we've got this map that's showing Superfund sites that currently have a status. And it also has some boundaries of like where those, like the areas that are connected to those sites. So we'll add it as it is currently saved in the map with this one layer hidden and the other one showing. So that's just an example of how you can really quickly pull something in from outside. I'm going to say, so when you have a map that is outside of a sidecar, it does kind of limit what you're able to do with it. So if you want to be able to do the kind of like media action, interacting with the map itself, right now there's like not much we can do to the map that we've already added. So let's go ahead and instead put this thing inside of a sidecar. All right, so this is now going to give us the option if we want to add media actions so that we can sort of interact with this. So let's say our first interaction is seeing the area affected, impacted. All right, so we can add this button, and then when we hover over it and click on add action, it will give us the option. We can like completely change what's showing up on this if we want to like bring something completely different up. I often and mostly use it just to edit the map view. So with this, we could, set the action to be that we're going to zoom in on a point. We can also do things like change what layers are showing and how they're displayed. So that's what I'm going to do here. So now you can like turn it on and off. So I think I have to preview to show you what that looks like. Ooh. All right, so we've got our area impacted, and yeah. So that's kind of how to pull in some of the more complex maps, how to add context alongside a map that you're working on within story maps. And yeah, I would recommend just kind of, if you're interested in it, getting in here, playing around with it. It's really easy to just delete sections if you messed it up. I don't really like that map. It doesn't do anything for me. You can add things. You can just kind of play around with it. You basically can't. It's hard to. It's pretty hard to break story maps. So I would recommend just exploring around, clicking on different content sections, and seeing what it can do. When you are finished with a story map and you kind of want to share it with a broader public, you can come up here and click on Publish. By default, it's always going to be sharing privately, but you can choose to share within whatever organization you're part of. So at the University of Minnesota, this would be other people at the university, or you can choose to share it publicly with everyone. I'm not going to because I have factually incorrect things in my story map. So I'm just going to keep it private for now while I fix those errors. And then I'll come up here and click on Publish. So you can have something that is published but not shared, and that's fine. I do actually recommend um, it. So it saves automatically, but if you leave something up for a very long time, sometimes it'll like develop some errors. So I recommend like sitting down, working on it for a while, and then publishing it to kind of double save your progress, and then closing out. So I'm gonna go ahead and check. Looks like there are some questions. Okay, I'm assuming you can customize text graphics map features with arcade language. That's a good question, Joe. I am not 100% sure. Are you talking about like within the maps that you're pulling in, or?
I was more talking about using like arcade to like stylize things differently, or maybe put in bullet points, or kind of move the pictures in graphics around, kind of back on the main story map itself, or just in general. I've only started to just kind of use arcade a little bit. For
Yeah,
people who are confused, arcade is not pinball machines. I had to learn that too. It's a Esri specific programming language that can be used in like basically all the products.
yeah. So arcade, I'm not aware of any specific place within ArcGIS story maps that like it makes it easier or obvious to use it. I'll say
Okay.
story maps is not as customizable as some of the other products like Experience Builder or other aspects of ArcGIS online. That said, I'm not going to say you absolutely can't because I'll be honest, I mostly use story maps to like teach classes. So I, usually don't get too much deeper than what I just showed you, just because of the nature of classes and how far students can often get. So I'm not sure is my answer.
That's okay. Yep. Thanks.
All right. Next question is, what's the difference between a sidecar and a guided map tour? That is awesome question. So the main difference I would say is that in a sidecar, you can do whatever you want. Like you don't have to be focused on just having a map. You can have a section that's a map and then, oh gosh, oops, add a section. And then this one, it's going to be instead, I'm going to put an image. We'll do this one. And over here, oh gosh, that's, do not crop that image. And over here, I have like a bunch of different options for how much context, how much information I'm adding. I can add basically anything that I can add outside of a sidecar. I can also add inside of it. So I can add charts, I can add timelines. Inside of a guided map tour, you're really pretty limited in what you can add and the type of context that you can give. So basically you can put a few different images. It doesn't have to just be one, but I think there's a limit. You can have a title, you can have a short description. So it kind of, I would say, in terms of choosing between those two different components, I'd say it really just depends, like how much context or information do you want to be giving about each place. um, if it's just something really short and it's fine to just have like a few images and really a couple sentences about it, then guided map tour would be a really great way to do it. If you want that same kind of experience, you can make something that feels a lot like a map tour inside of sidecar, just by like putting a point and moving someone's zoom and focus over slide by slide. But then you have the opportunity to put pretty much as much context about each of those points as you want. So it's kind of, again, like depends on what information you have and what feel you're hoping to have and to give to your reader. All right, we have a question. Oh, can I add a legend to the last map? Yep, I definitely can. Sorry about that. So we'll come on in here and edit our map. So to add legends to maps, it's one of the options that's inside of this gear wheel option bar again. So we can add legend. By default, it's going to be this box in the corner, and it's going to be closed. I'd say, like, I work in this platform all the time, so I know that I need to come down here and click on it. I'd say if you're making something for the general public, they may very well not realize that this is how they would get more information. So some options are, you can click to keep the legend open all the time. So we can save that. The other option that I sometimes see people do, you can just turn this into an image, like do a screen capture or sort of grab this information and just put it over here in the sidecar by just adding it like as an image. And so that way it's going to like stay up and stay present at all times. So that's not, that's kind of a hack and a workaround. But I'd say, especially, in this example, there's only a few things in our legend, but if we get a legend that's really complicated, that has a lot of different classes or a few different data layers that are all on the map at the same time, it can take up a lot of real estate and a lot of space and cover things in the map. So yeah, either adding it and having it stay open or putting it over on the side for context.